right. Well, here we are once again.
Hi, welcome to another
Hi.
episode of Sex Nerd Sex Nerd Podcast. Almost forgot what we were doing. We haven't done
I
these in a minute.
know. uh,
Anyway,
Josh,
hi, hi. Yeah, it's been a minute.
for those of us who, for those of you, I should say, who don't know who we are, I am Dr. Victoria Hartman.
And I'm almost Dr. Josh Corum. Almost this year, hopefully.
Yay!
Let's see. Uh, I'm a sociologist, just so everyone gets the idea. We're not your conventional. How would you call it? Like journalistic sex educators.
No,
Say that
no,
without
man.
pissing
Right.
anybody off. We're going to do enough of that today.
And I'm a clinical sexologist, and I actually can add another hat to my titles. I have now successfully become somewhat of a forensic accountant.
Aha.
So, well, as it pertains to evaluating pornography and all of that. So,
Gotcha.
wasn't expecting to add that as a hat to my series of hats, but I've apparently become that now, forensic accountant. So, on top of being a forensic sexologist, so and clinical sexologist, all the letters after the name, right? Yeah. So yes, we are going to upset a lot of people today, and I'm still kind of reeling from. So
I think also.
So just like let me backtrack a little bit.
Well, let me give a preface too for people listening. We talk a lot about nuance on this show. We talk a lot about science in the show. And we go down thought rabbit holes because that's fun. So if you are just a surface level thinker and you don't want to venture this way, it's fine. Maybe go watch Joe Rogan, something like that. But here we dive down. It's a lot of like mental masturbation. So if you're not into that, you might want to go.
Well, yeah. A lot, yes. So, yeah, you and I have sometimes hours-long winding conversations, which for me actually is a lot of fun. I don't get to do that very much, so I'm very grateful that you and I have that kind of a friendship. But so, as some of you who know, Josh and I've been friends for a really long time, and so I will just randomly call him about some experience I've had or whatever's going on, and he will go like, well, and then I go, what? And so this was actually one of those things where I called him about something and he says, well, are you aware? And Josh took me down a rabbit hole that I had, like, it was sort of like having blinders on that I didn't know I had on. Because it was just like, well, I just accept it and I don't think about it much. And then I started kind of doing my own research, and just my whole reaction these last few weeks as we were starting to plan this show was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And I've been telling other sexologists and they're like, wait, what? And it's just been this sort of cascade of, oh my Gods. And are you, what? I haven't thought of it that way. And so, I thought, you made an excellent point about this should be a show topic because I had the oh my God, and other of my colleagues had the oh my God reaction, and never gave it any thought until you brought it up to me.
And also, I want to do the preface of like, I know I'm a straight dude. I know what I look like. I know people more than likely are going to watch this, and not a lot of people are going to watch this anyway, but they're going to get upset by it. So yes, I understand who I am, and I understand the conversation we're going to have, blah, blah, blah. I get it.
Yeah.
But we can still have this conversation because no, it's not my lived experience, but I do the research. And you and I are both educated enough that we can have this conversation on this topic.
Yeah. And that's the thing. You and I generally come from that perspective of we want to think about this stuff, right? It's not necessarily coming from an accusatory place as much as it is, let's take a look at this. Let's unpack it.
Yeah. And what we're unpacking today is you had an experience, right? where I don't exactly remember the context, and we don't really need to get into that. I don't want to give too much of your personal information out, but
I had an experience. Well, I can go into this. I had an experience where the friend of a friend, who is a gay man, a gay white man, felt comfortable speaking to me in rather misogynistic ways, and I was uncomfortable with it, but dismissed my discomfort at the same time. I was referred to as a female and not a woman or a person, and it felt rather dehumanizing in the moment. But again, because I was talking to a gay man, I just sort of just blew it off. Just like, oh, well, I know gay guys have that attitude about women, and so I'm not going to personalize it. I'm just going to get over it. But it like ate away at me for a while, and then I brought it up to you, and you said, well, actually, and that's when I started to, sort of examine my reactions to my interaction. Well, I started examining my own interactions with gay men, and again, I have friends. And I don't want to go into that. I have the friends thing, but I have had many, many, many gay friends and colleagues and so forth over the years, and never took issue with any of the ways in which we communicated. And like a lot of them, very much, they're generally really great people. They're my friends. So and for me, it was just a big joke. Just a big joke. But this particular interaction didn't sit well with me, but I couldn't figure out why, but I just dismissed it.
And what we're dealing with, so the big reveal, I guess if you didn't tell by the title, is the prevalence of misogyny within gay male culture. And that's really what we really want to nail down. It's not like not calling this individual misogynistic. It's misogyny within the culture that is perpetuated by a lot of these newer, I don't want to call them tropes because I feel like that's minimizing, but tropes essentially within the, I don't want to call them stereotypes, but just like these ongoing behaviors or tendencies or expectations, frameworks within the gay culture that perpetuate this notion of misogyny, even between gay folks too, right?
Yeah.
Gay men.
You see that generationally now, where you have some of the Gen Zs and younger millennials who they're talking about the misogyny within their community and how difficult that is to navigate, even in gay culture itself, between older and younger gay people. Yeah.
And that also manifests in dating. Colleagues, gay colleagues and stuff that I see that are dating, they talk about the prevalence of what's called mass for mass, right? Masculine for masculine. And in some respects, that's how that manifests between gay individuals, gay men.
Well, what does that look like?
So if you're on a dating website, you put mass for mass. So if you're masculine presenting, right, you don't want, or you're not looking for a femme gay man, a femme boy or something like that. Like you want a masculine presenting gay man. And to some extent, I'm on the fence on this one because, arguably you're attracted to the same sex, right? But you're also attracted to a lot of times the same gender. So that gender performance that you are attracted to yourself in some ways, almost like autophallophilia or something like that. I don't want to go that far, but like you're attracted to like individuals. You're attracted to men and the presentation of men. I'm straight. I'm attracted to females. I'm attracted to women. Feminine presenting women. We should do another show on the prevalence of the new sexuality, super straight. That has
I just read about that, and I went, okay. All right.
But I think there's some. So when you have that, right, it's like this preference issue, right? So you have the preference of mass for mass, but what winds up manifesting is that outward misogyny towards women, towards other gay men who are feminine. Like, So yes, you might have a preference for masculine men, but what is it rooted in? Like, it's okay to have your preference, but it's also okay to examine your preference too. Like, why do I have this preference? And I was reading some articles for this, and that's what it was saying, that maybe that some of that mass for mass is rooted in that misogyny towards women particularly. And so then it just gets redirected towards other femme men.
So, okay, so like I said, I'm kind of new into this thought expansion, I guess, if you will. So the question that comes to my mind is, where does the misogyny in the gay community come from? Is it because misogyny is built into society? Is it a societal thing on a mass scale? Is it individual misogyny from particular people that infects, I guess, or spreads through the gay community? Is the gay community simply rooted in misogyny because it's kind of like a men's only club that no one challenges? I mean, where is that? What's the basis of this misogyny and this anti-femininity?
It could be all those places. It could also be things like toxic masculinity, or what you might call hyper homosexuality, where
what's wait, what is hyper homosexuality?
I made that up, but like, so when we look at heterosexual men,
it's 6.5 on the Kinsey scale.
Right, it's 6.5, almost a 7.
Almost a 7, right?
Okay. Yeah, it's hyper homosexuality. Well, when we have men, so straight men, right, straight cis men, they kind of control mass. One of the avenues in sociology, we talk about this a little bit, in Seidman's social construction of sexuality, he goes into detail about controlling sexuality for men is like controlling other social behaviors, right? But one way, but also controlling gender. So controlling sexuality and controlling gender go hand in hand. So if I say, all right, well, you're acting feminine, so you must be gay, right? Oh, you're not tough. It means you're, the F word, right? And I can certify my straightness by sleeping with a lot of women, by being aggressive, by being overly masculine, all those things that like solidify into being, that kind of solidify masculinity and straightness together, right? Maybe there's some avenue or some aspect of that in gay culture where it's, the misogyny is a way to reaffirm one's homosexuality. I hate women so much. All I want is dick, and I'm gonna be mean to women. I'm gonna demean women just to prove that I like dick that much. That's an extreme version, but you know what I mean.
Huh. I'm going to be speechless a lot in this episode. I'm not generally talking over you because
I mean, it's speculation, of course. But
I only have the experience of being a woman. Okay. So, sure. And I've talked about this on previous episodes. I have had the experience on being on high levels of testosterone. And I noticed that, when I was on those high levels of testosterone, that I became more callous and less empathetic. So I have had bits and pieces of, I don't want to call it male experience, but having testosterone influenced me. But being male, I would imagine, just like being female, is more than just the levels of your hormones. It has to do with your influences, social constructs, how you grew up, psychology, etc., biology, whatever.
It's definitely more than the sum of its parts.
Of course, right? And so I can only speak from the experience of being a woman and misogyny that I bumped up against from straight men, and even from and I struggle with the whole internalized misogyny thing, but I don't know if I can call now that I know about toxic femininity, I don't know that I'm so ready to apply toxic masculinity or internalized misogyny to some women's behavior. So I'm sort of teetering on that. But I
think ultimately what we forget. Sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
No. Go ahead. I'm still formulating a thought.
I think when we look at this prevalence, and we'll post articles hopefully to the links of this that show just example after example of women talking about this misogyny. And I think
and gay men too.
Right. Gay men talking about it as an issue in their culture, or in their community. And I think what we forget when we look at gay men or when we examine these things is that they're still men. Like they're still men within society. Yes, you can look at, they're this oppressed minority, but they're still men. So in the dynamic between like biological sex and the like roots of misogyny, which are between men and women throughout history, they're still men. They're still men.
Right. And I that's the thing that kind of struck me as I was looking into this is just from my own experiences I've never given it a second thought when a gay man spanked me just randomly. I might not even known him. I could be at a party and I've gone to gay clubs and stuff. They'd grab my boob, they'd spank my butt, they would, grab me to kiss me as sort of a joke, in the middle of a conversation or just walking by. They have openly expressed disgust for female genitalia and for feminine, not feminine behavior, but more like the biology of being a female. Sure. Have dehumanized me down to defining me as female, down to my reproductive ability. Use I don't want to say offensive words because I don't find really any words offensive, but what could be considered offensive words like cunt and stuff like that to describe my genitals, and that's why they're gross, or even to call me those words, or to, like, well, bitch, this is how it's going to be, or, just all these kinds of things, or, slut shaming, the whole thing. And as a woman, I've just kind of always laughed it off, like, oh, he's just gay, okay, whatever. But if a straight guy did it, I would deck him for less. And that's the thing that really stirred thought in me is, have I and other women, because other women laugh about it too, right? They want gay guys to be their best friends, right? Oh, he's just so great to have as a friend. Have I contributed as a woman, because I make it such a up until you and I talked about this, it has been such a non-issue for me. Have I contributed to the continuation of misogyny in gay communities because I'm not holding gay men to account the same way I am to straight men? I've had to ask myself that question.
Yeah. I mean, that could be a cultural thing too, that, like you just said, a lot of women don't. And I would probably say the vast majority don't.
No, we don't. We think it's funny.
Yeah, somehow they get a pass because maybe they're an oppressed minority, like I mentioned, or that they're not a sexual threat to you.
Well, and see, now there's where I was going to go next, right? You have this ability to read my mind. It's so weird. Okay, so that's where I was going next. Okay, I thought about that, and I thought, well, maybe I'm just allowing that kind of thing because they're not a sexual threat. And then I had to backtrack a second and go, well, are they not? Because we know that statistically there's a large swath of bisexual men who are closeted in the gay community because bisexuality is maligned and shamed in the gay community. Okay. So can we then assume, okay, there's two parts here. Okay. There's closeted bisexual men. Is it then reasonable to assume that they're not a sexual threat if they are in the closet as bisexual men? And then the second train of thought that I had was, the second train of thought I had was, does that preclude gay men from sexually assaulting women from a power place instead of a sexual attraction place? So that's where my head started to go, and I start asking those questions. I can't, where I got to was, actually, no, I can't just make a blanket assumption that who I think are gay men are not dangerous sexually. And I add to that, because they already have been, by being allowed to be misogynistic to me and being allowed to sexually harass women and have it be sanctioned. They already are.
Right, but I would say potentially sexually dangerous. They're not.
Well, if we talk about sexually dangerous as rape.
Right.
But aren't we culturally as women allowing gay men to sexually harass us?
That's a great question.
Like I said, all these questions, they started like perpetuating themselves as I started to like explore this topic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right.
Because if you did that, you would be a predator.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yep. You as a straight guy, you would be classified as a sexual harasser and a predator if you behave the same way.
Mm-hmm. And I would fair to say that some gay men do experience that. Some gay men don't. I don't want to label them all, because all men, that kind of stuff. But we're looking at this as a trend in the culture, and a trend that you see amongst women and yourself.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's really what we got to remember. So what are some of the examples that you found in the article that you were reading?
Well, the one that the thing that actually kind of stood out to me was I read one. It was on Living Spaces, and it talks about drag and how maybe we're not looking at that drag. Another way to look at it is drag portrays the worst catty, toxic femininity and mocks it. And they get big shows mocking toxic femininity, or just mocking femininity, like making it extreme. Right.
I think as I was doing my research for another topic that we are going to dive into, part of this, one of the arguments against all this is that gay men are oppressed minority, right? So it's like an oppressed can't oppress, that kind of argument, which I think is foolish. But a lot of the articles I saw were older, like at least 5, if not 10 years older. And they're arguing that drag isn't popular, so it can't be really this thing that it like has that large cultural impact. But I would argue that it is really popular now.
It is popular because it does have an impact.
Yeah. And I think with a lot of social media,
RuPaul's drag show.
Yeah, RuPaul's Drag Race. And a lot of them from that show have gotten their own shows. And then also the popularity of smaller social medias like TikTok and Instagram and Snapchat, I think have really allowed a lot of these individuals a lot of public space to share messages. When you have people who have 500,000 followers or more, million followers, like that's a big impact. And I think that's something we have to remember is the world is not like it was in the early 2000s, where it was just these people were so far away. They're not that far away. They're right there in your hand. Right. And I think a lot of times their messages can reach more people than they think. And I would argue too that. So I referenced this book way too much, I think, and I referenced this reading, this chapter of this book oddly way too much. In the early 2000s, Chuck Klosterman, who's an essayist, wrote this book, Sex, Drugs, and Cocoa Puffs, where he
Okay.
references, yeah, it's just a series of essays. It's a great book. I like his writing. He references what he calls the real world effect.
Okay.
And he kind of did this pseudo observation of the behavior of college students that changed from the late 80s up to the early 2000s. And he referenced the real world and how the change in the real world show, remember
The show. Okay.
the first few seasons were really just people. It was kind of boring. The first season of the real world is not very exciting.
Okay.
But the later season, they started doing the like reality TV bullshit where they started infusing drama and like getting people to drink and all this stuff. Like it impacted the behavior of college students because young kids, high school kids, would see how these people were acting. Oh, they're in college. That's how I'm supposed to act. And then when they got to college, they just emulated the behavior that they saw. And he documented how that showed. And I make that comparison to the change in gay culture with particular representations on TV. How if you're a gay man in a small town with no representation and no how examples of how you're supposed to act, except for what you see on TV,
Yeah.
is going to impact your behavior. And I
Sure.
think what we're seeing now is the impact of like the drag queen media representations of these hyper feminine, the cattiness, what we would categorize as toxic femininity in an earlier show. These
Mm.
behaviors are getting echoed in this kind of, echo chamber of behavior. And it's like, well, I'm a drag queen or I'm a gay man. I'm going to be a drag queen. This is how I'm supposed to act, right? And the creation of these characters, or I would argue caricatures, are in some respect like kind of just part of the emulation of these behaviors. And I think it echoes and creates more misogyny and creates more of this like ill representation.
Yeah. I pulled up this article on Vice actually, and I wasn't aware of this, and I'm not the biggest fan of Rose McGowan, but um, she actually brought it up in the past, and
Mm-hmm.
they also talk about let's see, uh, about the misogyny directed at queer and lesbian women. One of
Yeah.
them here in this article, her name's Victoria Sin, and she's quoted as saying, "Some of the worst misogyny I've experienced come from gay men. It can feel almost more gross than it does from straight men. It's like you're not even trying to express sexual interest in me. You're just asserting your dominance over my body because you're a man. You're just doing it because you can." And I I had to sit back after I read that and really give some thought to that because, like I said, I've had these kind of experiences over the course of my life with gay men and just laughed it off.
Mm-hmm.
And I was taught to laugh it off. I can remember as a teenager laughing it off. It's like you hang out with the gay guys, if they talk about effing you, fucking you as, well, if you don't lose your virginity, I'll pop that cherry, so, you don't have to run around being embarrassed about being a virgin. Like I've encountered that kind of stuff since I was 15, 16 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I just never, I just, you're so funny. Like never for a second thought about it. And again, but I don't identify as a lesbian or a queer woman. I'm bi and as it's because I can uh uh operate as straight in the world. I don't know that I've faced as much misogyny from the gay community because I don't move in the world as queer, right?
Yeah.
um but
Well, I got
okay.
there we go. Yes, you don't operate in those fields.
Right. Yeah. So I operate in the world largely. I pass as a straight woman, and so I don't have the same kind of. I have more privilege than, say, my queer or lesbian counterparts. And there was another quote in this article that says male homosexuality has multiple histories. Of course, it was largely demonized by Western Judeo-Christian society as a sexual deviation from the correct gender role for men. Yet there are also other narratives molded on the romantic and eroticized notion of male bonding in classical Greece, which was viewed in Homeric poetry as more important than relations with women. This parallel history is visible in the celebration of male beauty in Renaissance art, through the writings of Walter Pater a 19th century critic who wrote extensively on the aesthetics of male beauty and friendship. It's absolutely true that existed, agrees Dr. Sam Solomon, English lecturer at the University of Sussex, though it was very class inflected. It was an ideal of social bonding and advancement realizable only for wealthy and educated men. Other men and women were excluded. So there seems to be also a long history of this kind of male-dominated, male bonding preference to the exclusion or dehumanization of women. I hadn't considered that either. Yeah. So,
I mean,
femininity seems to be sort of the gutter in some gay culture.
Right. And if you look throughout history, well, we'll say throughout history, we'll say we look at more of the arts, you see the lack of representation of women in the arts, and
as
especially
artists
those
or as subjects of art,
as artists,
okay.
I mean, think about fashion, right? It's predominantly men. I would argue that it's predominantly gay men at the top.
Yeah. Okay.
Even like art, like, we don't often think of women being like, especially Renaissance
artists. Yeah, most of the classical artists are men. I can't even.
Yeah.
You think of Michelangelo and Rembrandt. So you don't actually. I don't know that a woman's name comes immediately to mind. A more modern era, but not classical.
And even like cooking, right?
Even
most
like
chefs are men. Cooking, most chefs are men.
Oh, right.
But, and I think in those high-end art aspects, right? There is straightness, but there's a lot of gay men in those fields. And I'm not blaming gay men for why there's no women in like being chefs or artists or fashion designers and things like that. But I think it echoes that misogyny, and of course, we have to look at the history of women in the workplace and stuff like that. They weren't always had access to those spaces, so it's a historical, cultural aspect. I don't want to minimize the success of men saying that it's because women weren't around. But often fields that we think of as being dominated by gay men, women still aren't, at the top either.
Right.
So, and I think that just echoes those examples of it. They're still men, right? It's not just because they're gay in this one aspect of oppressed minority, they still are men who have that privilege.
Yes.
And I think this is right, and that's the rub of intersectionality, right? That's what often gets misunderstood. Is like intersectionality is just not an intersect of disadvantages; it's an intersect of privileges and disadvantages.
Right.
So, like, you may have this disadvantage over here, but you might have this advantage up here that kind of supersedes that.
Right. Right. Or at least minimizes the disadvantage part.
Right.
Right. Well, and I think, and I'm not going to this is not me being sort of anti-feminist or giving license to straight men, but I think in this case, if we're talking about misogyny, that straight men are held to a different standard than gay men are when it comes to the expression of misogyny against women, which I think then gives them more privilege.
Interesting. Okay. That's a claim if I've heard one.
Well,
I mean,
if like I said earlier, if you, well, okay, you're my friend, so it's a little different. You have certain permissions with me anyway, but
sure.
but someone that I don't know, okay, who's a man, if he were to come up to me and smack me, or or like slap me on the ass, or grab a boob, or make some kind of derogatory comment about my gender, he would get in trouble. A gay man, well, not with me anymore, that's going to change, but a gay man doing that doesn't. So isn't the argument then reasonable to say that because gay men can express their misogyny openly, that they have more privilege in terms of how they operate in society? They are not held to the same standard. They have less consequences for being misogynistic. Huh?
Is privilege the ability to demean others? I guess the privilege would be unchecked.
I'm looking at it from a consequence perspective. So people who have more money have fewer consequences when they are operating in society. And so I might not be applying privilege 100% as other people might be thinking, but I'm looking at it from, and not to negate that, I'm just saying people who have more privilege have more access and have less consequences, and that's kind of like my train of thought.
So you're free from consequences. They're more free from certain social consequences.
Right.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That actually kind of segues into...
Because if we talk about white privilege, we talk about, I, as a white person, as a white woman, can go to the grocery store with a hoodie on and a mask and baggy clothes and a backpack, and no one's going to give me a second look. But if a person of color went in the same way, they could likely be followed through the grocery store, right? Mm-hmm. So I have more privilege because I'm held to I have fewer consequences acting in the same manner.
Right.
Does that make sense?
That's fair. Okay. I see where you're going with that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I agree. I think that actually segues into my point that I was going to make. To add to this is, and not the only one. There's been several. Actually, Mary Cheney, the daughter of Dick Cheney, voiced this opinion, as well as I'm not super keen on this person, but Sharon Davies, she's a former Olympic diver. She's a little conservative leaning. Okay. She's anti-trans women in sports too. So, I don't know if she's conservative, but her politics tend to lean that way. But Cheney in 2015 and this other woman, Sharon Davies, in 2019, actually both came out arguing that drag, we talked about drag and we talked about these social consequences, is very similar, if not no different than blackface. And actually there's a law review. Yeah. There's a law review article as well. Let me find it. I might have lost it. Oh, here it is. This is in the Chicago Kent Law Review back in 2000, actually. So this is even longer ago, before drag was actually really that popular. That by Kelly Kleinman that makes the same argument, but in a legal sense, or attempts to in a legal sense, that drag is very similar to blackface. And I also read the opposition.
I haven't read any of these articles, so now I'm curious.
Yeah. So can you kind of
go into their argument a little bit? Because I'm completely unfamiliar with this thought.
Yeah, so it can spider web out into kind of weird nuances, but the argument is essentially that, so blackface was created because black folks were not allowed to be in film or on stage and the creation of particular characters were caricatures of black folk, right?
Okay.
They're called, one's the minstrel, the zipcoon, those were kind of the two big ones. The mammy, right? Those were these caricatures that were created in early television and early theater, American theater particularly.
Is this, let me just interject for a minute. The mammy caricature, that was the Aunt Jemima argument, right?
Right.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah. So, black folks weren't allowed to be on stage or be on film. So there was representation of these by white folks who would don blackface and act in these exaggerated manner. Okay. Even when black folks were allowed to be on stage and be on TV early, they had to wear blackface.
Really?
So, yeah. So there was almost a blacking up, as I read in an article, of black individuals just for film.
Oh.
So, yeah. So they still had to buy into these tropes. All right. So that being said, the same argument is being formulated towards drag, that men and that, men, as gay men usually, are imitating women on stage for performance. So on a basic level, you have that foundational understanding. Now, white folks who were the dominant group, and subjugating black folks, were emulating these characters.
Yeah.
Same thing goes for men. We forget that gay men are men. So it's men emulating women or caricaturizing women.
Yeah, characterizing.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, is the characterization of mannerisms, facial features, dress, all this stuff. Those are the two similarities. Now, there's more than that. And this law review article goes into a lot of the similarities. It's really fascinating to dive into these things. Their behaviors are exaggerated on purpose, right? And those are the keys. Now, some of the arguments that have come up against this is that, again, the oppressed, this is an oppressed minority. They're really celebrating women. Let
me interject for a second. Are gay men still an oppressed minority with marriage equality? Because I have to find the study, but I seem to recall there was a study that looked into class and financial well-being and or wealth, and found that gay men had actually surpassed straight men in terms of wealth accumulation. Or I have to find the study again, but that can the argument still be made that gay men are an oppressed minority? I mean, what are the statistics on that? I don't know.
I don't have those statistics either, but it's an interesting claim for sure. I
have to see if I can find that. I seem to recall, or maybe it was not necessarily straight men, but all other class of people or whatever societally class people. Like it was straight men and then gay men and then everyone else underneath.
Well, now
in terms of the ability to accumulate wealth.
Are we just talking about gender, or are we talking about race too?
White.
Okay, so that's actually inaccurate too, because you have Asian men.
Oh.
Like Japanese, Chinese, and then Indian as well.
Oh.
Because they're all lumped into the same category.
Oh.
They make far more than white straight men do.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah. They surpassed us a long time.
Okay, so like I said, I'll have to see where. I can't remember where I saw that, but I remember it. That's what stirred that question. Is like, can they still be considered that if their ability to accumulate wealth has surpassed all other minority groups or suppressed groups?
Right. Is that oppression?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we have to make, again, we like nuances. And just like intelligence, right? Everyone talks about intelligence, but we know there's all these different types of intelligences, right? Emotional intelligence. You know, I argue that there's a sexual intelligence as well. You know, there's all these different intelligences.
Okay.
I would say that oppression rears its head in different ways. I think you have economic oppression. I think you also have social oppression. Okay. And I mean, we try to regulate social oppression the best we can, and legally through economic oppression,
right,
or discrimination.
Right.
So it's hard to say. Like, I mean, you still see men being beaten up, but everybody gets beat up sometime. You know, like, are they being beaten up because they're gay? Are they being discriminated against because they're gay, or are they just an asshole? Like, you really have to dive into that nuance.
Yeah, but, there's nuance in all of that. Yeah.
Right. So is it
they
economic?
Could be still oppressed in one aspect, but not in another. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
You know, I don't want to jump. I don't want to.
Yeah, I have to see if I can find that study, because it stood out to me at the time. So I'll see if I can find it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
this is an interesting concept about the whole idea about drag as blackface. I never gave that. So what?
And the main take home is that it's a group of power, like mocking or characterizing a group with less power.
Right.
That's what that was like the first thing from the law review thing.
Okay.
Is that first, each is a masquerade in which powerful or privileged people dress up as less powerful or less privileged people.
Right.
So I guess we can dive into, do gay men have more privilege than I wouldn't say white men. Do gay men have more privilege than women?
Yes.
You're saying yeah. Okay.
I'm saying yes.
Okay. All right. So by that definition, by that argument, then this point stands true. Right? And then the second is,
well, and I'm basing that a lot on the fact that women are still penalized for like having families, whereas men aren't so much. Right?
In business.
Women are considered having less earning potential over the course of their lifetime because of their ability to give birth.
I would say the decision to give birth impacts that, though, right?
Right.
Yeah. Right. So second, and this is an interesting point, drag and blackface originated when the impersonated people were excluded from the stage. And that's what some of the arguments that I see is they go back to from against this concept is that they go back and it's like, well, and during Shakespeare and even in movies and like it's presentation or it's celebration and empowerment. But this argument is saying that, however, each outlasted the original excuse for its practice. So, right, the practice of women not being on stage or on film is the same as well, they've always been able to be on film, but stage particularly, is no longer relevant. So the history of it can't be applied. The same as blackface, right? You know, black folks were not allowed to be on stage, not allowed to be in film. So, but now they are, and blackface is bad. Blackface, I mean, we dive into a lot of, the discrimination and oppression of black folks for sure, but I don't feel like we do that as much for women, especially lately. Like in the 60s, during the rise of like the third wave feminism, or second wave feminism, absolutely.
Right.
But I feel like it's not as, we don't really use that anymore as a tool to examine. I feel like feminism is now, whether it's TERF or inclusive.
Right. Yeah. And that's the thing. You and I have had conversations about this in the past that, my concern, and one of the reasons, I don't know, I've had to look at that over the course of a couple of years, that initially I wanted to distance myself from feminism because it had become so polarized and weaponized. but it's the idea of feminism, I'm still very drawn to. It's just that the way in which it's manifested over the course of the last few years, I believe it delegitimizes it
Mm-hmm.
because of the polarization.
Yeah.
Right? It's not reasonable. It seems like the ability to have reasonable conversations about feminism have been superseded by whoever's the loudest.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the idea of feminism, I'm still very drawn to. That's interesting. That is interesting.
Yeah. And there's several points that are being made, and excuse me, Mary Cheney. The points she made are really interesting too. Basically echoing these same lines. Who is a lesbian, by the way?
For some reason, I thought that Mary Cheney operated in a different school of thought as her conservative father.
Perhaps she's still a Republican.
Oh, or at least never mind.
At the time of this, but it's at the time of this article. At the time of this article, she's still a Republican. Okay. But she makes the argument that, in this article, that it's insulting. It minimizes and creates a sort of, not just caricature, but a limited spectrum of women. Mm. There was some arguments that it oddly, it created an unattainable expectation of beauty, which I thought for women, which I thought was fascinating.
Are they talking sort of the hyper feminine body shape and that, yes, like small waist, large hips, breasts, those representations?
Yeah, the contouring and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the behaviors, the cattiness, and that they really talk about cattiness within the drag community, or the representations of drag in the media, and the stereotypes at which drag queens will contend with. And even in this article that I saw, and this article is in the Slate, actually, by Ms. Cracker. This was 2015. The title is "Drag Isn't Like Blackface, but that doesn't mean it's always kind to women." So it's a counter argument, but also dives into it is and it isn't. It's basically one of the articles you posted, like drag queens looking within the community to see the misogyny. I think the author recounted, being backstage at a performance and the drag queens arguing that there's too much tuna in the audience. Right. So that's another example of going back to your point.
What I'm talking about. Yep.
Of this misogyny.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So it does go hand in hand. You have this misogyny. You have this lack of tone deafness within the drag community about what they're doing, because
I think there's a lot of defensiveness about it.
Yeah. Now,
I mean, I'm glad to see that some folks in the gay community are taking that step to take a look at it. But I would have to say that hasn't caught on very much in the gay community.
Mm-hmm. Now, I don't want to leave this just at this negative, because this article I read, I liked how they wrapped it up, that maybe the communities aren't being kind to women, but that there are places in those communities where issues for women can be addressed. And they do talk about examples of drag queens addressing issues that befall women in their performance, and that getting a lot of positive feedback and a lot of attention, which I think is important. I think
I like that.
Right. Like, we could have this argument. I like going to drag shows. I've been to a few. They're entertaining. Sure. Like, I don't want that I don't want my pursuit of justice to do more damage than what the outcome of my justice.
Okay, but
prevails.
let me be the counter. Let me play devil's advocate here.
Okay? Sure.
My initial reaction when you said that was like, oh, you know what? If they're like speaking to this issue in these drag shows and in the gay community, and they're talking about what befalls women in the middle of a drag show and stuff, the comedy of it is okay, because then it's socially responsible comedy. That was my first reaction. But then where my head went was, can we do the same thing with blackface? Can we still have blackface on stage as long as we discuss it and its problems? Again, if one isn't okay, why is another one okay? And if you have a reasonable argument to counter mine, I want to hear it.
I do.
Okay.
Tropic Thunder.
What?
Tropic Thunder.
What is
Robert
that?
Downey Jr.'s. You've never seen Tropic Thunder?
No.
Oh man. So in the movie Tropic Thunder, which came out, I don't know exactly when it came out, but it came out maybe 10 years ago.
Okay.
Something like that. Robert Downey Jr. is in blackface.
Right.
But
I remember
the
that.
Movie, yeah. Right. So the movie is about the making of a movie, and it was this parody of making a movie and the extremes and the bullshit that actors will do. And it was this example of this controversial actor who went through this surgery, right? And basically transformed himself into a black man to be this role, right? Rather than just getting a black man to do the role, And so I feel like that's an example of, it's more of an example of critiquing the audacity of Hollywood sometimes in actors and their complete tone deafness, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know, is that an example of what you're talking about? Like, can we right, I'm not advocating for blackface, but
right, because to me it seems as though if we're having the argument could be made, well, if we're having socially responsible conversation about misogyny and what befalls women and the disadvantages that women have while we're having drag shows, I think some people would say, therefore, we can have shows where blackface is acceptable as long as we have a conversation about it during the show or what have you. And I don't know how many people are going to be okay with that argument. Right. So it would seem more reasonable to me to say, if that's not acceptable, maybe drag shouldn't be either. Right? Because otherwise it seems like to me there's cognitive dissonance there.
Yeah.
Then
you're right.
It's okay to do this to women. It's not okay to do this in other areas to other oppressed people or minority people. Why is it then okay with women? Why is it still okay?
That's a great question. I do not know. And could this go back to the claim that gay men have more privilege in that social
in that area of social interaction?
Can they get away with this because of X, Y, and Z? Mm-hmm. And I say get away with
because then you could have the same. Let's make another argument here. If it's okay for gay men to do it, and we just laugh it off, having straight men say, "Well, then we should be able to do it too." Not okay. Maybe it shouldn't be okay for straight men or gay men. That seems to me like the more reasonable argument.
Maybe. One of the arguments that I saw oddly was about clothing, right? So we're talking about privilege, right? And that it wasn't a privilege. Women could wear anything they want. And to a certain extent, that's a privilege. I
know women can't wear anything they want because you have a whole swath of individuals who are like, you can wear whatever you want as long as you're classy. But as soon as you start dressing like a slut, you're slut shamed.
Well, you can still wear it. You can still wear it out in public. But me wearing a dress.
Oh, I see.
He's going to get more stares.
No, if you're a not as large a man, you'll get beat up for it.
True. Right. I don't have a lot of natural predators in this world. But, right. Or maybe not beat up, but at least ridiculed. And even I would get ridiculed for it, you know, to some extent.
Yeah.
So that's the argument. That
yes, because then you'd be classified as a cross-dresser, and cross-dressers are perverts in mainstream society.
Right.
Yeah. It's the fetishization of being female in society's mind.
Right. Yeah. Whereas some will claim drag is a reclaiming of that privilege for men to wear whatever they want, to like whatever music they want, to enjoy the, you know, the pop stars and the, you know, but there's also an extreme version of that where they call them stalker fans, where gay men often drag, and gay men, going back to, regulate the behavior of these stars. Oh, do you believe what Britney's what the fuck Britney's wearing right now? Oh my God, what is she thinking? Like all that shit. Like straight men don't do that.
No.
Straight men don't do that.
No.
So there is a certain, like, it's like this tug of war of like privileges and misogyny, or like disadvantages and misogyny. It's really interesting to like pick apart.
Yep. Yeah. This stirred a whole bunch of thought for me and for colleagues that I spoke to. Like, I talked to one colleague who he has an exhibit at the museum, and he's like, "Holy shit, V! Holy shit! I never thought of that." Because as not only as a straight man, but a straight man with a military career, just the kind of moral and ethical standards that he's held to in the military around gender and women. And I know there are a lot of stories about misogyny in the military, but the things that people in the military, men in the military, are held to account to. I mean, you even talked about that when you lived close to a base or on base, that non-monogamy was not to be expressed or indulged in on the base. That could get you kicked out.
Yeah, adultery was still, you could get kicked out.
Yeah, adultery got you like a dishonorable discharge. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he was just like, what? So he had a more even, extreme reaction than I did. And I'm still reeling. Just like, I have so many questions. I have so many questions, and they just keep coming. So, yeah. And the question I think the one that stands out the most for me is, why are gay men allowed to be misogynistic openly and not held accountable for that? Why?
Right. And we didn't even go into a lot of the contention between the gay community and the lesbian community.
And the lesbian community.
Like,
right?
There's a lot to unpack there. The more that I actually can't speak very well on that. Like, I know that there's a lot. And you might even make the stretch of, we talked about rapid onset gender dysphoria, right? In one of our earlier shows.
Yeah.
We kind of critiqued it a little bit.
Yeah, well, I didn't really find her methods to be...
Right.
Yeah.
But could the same misogyny and homophobia, misogyny more so, be one of the many underlying causes of the increase of young trans men? We see a vast decrease in butch lesbians. The butch lesbian community is dwindling because many are just choosing to transition to trans men or genderqueer or something like that. So to identify as a butch lesbian is not nearly as popular. It wasn't popular. Well, there weren't that many numbers to begin with.
I haven't followed up on the what you're talking, the rapid onset gender. I haven't followed up on that since we did the episode.
Right. But I was just using that as an example to could we look at this through that misogynistic lens as well? Like, I don't want to be a woman anymore. I'd rather be a man.
Well,
I'm attracted to women, but I want to be a man because that's my gender, as opposed to being a butch lesbian. I'd rather just be a man.
So the question you're asking is, are younger genderqueer or lesbian women who are not feminine or not, who don't have a preference towards feminine presentation, are simply leaping to becoming trans men because of the perception of more privilege than to be a butch lesbian? Is that what you're arguing? Or is that what your question is?
Yeah,
That's
kind of.
Like,
I realize for many, it is they feel more comfortable with their gender presentation, but feeling safe as a man.
Well, that's my question. If they're still lesbian and still consider themselves women, are they making that choice from a societal perspective and then ignoring their gender identity for the purposes of societal advancement? Oh,
That's a good question. Could that be a component of rapid onset gender dysphoria? Like, I'm around all these people, I see these trans men around me, these self-identified trans men around me,
right.
And they're getting more respect than I am as a woman, even though I'm a lesbian as well. Like, let's do that. Because I feel safer in my gender expression, right? Like, as a man, I feel safer because I'm going to get more respect. I'm going to get more privilege.
Well, that's
than
true.
I would as.
That's true. Wow.
I don't know. Do trans men get more respect than trans women?
If they blend, yeah.
If they're stealth and they pass?
If they pass, yep.
Really? Do you think so?
Some of the...
That's an interesting study.
Well, right. And I've read some of this because, like, when I was on my testosterone journey, right, I was reading about trans men's perception of their interactions as they transitioned, right? And testosterone, trans men transition a lot faster than trans women simply because testosterone is such a powerful hormone, right? Yeah. And they noted in these interviews that two things happened. One, people listened to them where they weren't listened to before when they were presenting as women. What they were saying was taken more seriously, even though they were saying the same thing that they did when they were presenting as women, and that they got more respect in the workplace. The downside that they said was they noticed women started crossing the street when they would be walking down the street to avoid them. Because now they were seen as having more potential to be predatory. That's self-reporting.
Really
from trans
interesting.
Men. Yeah, that's self-reporting from trans men that they noticed that as their physical appearance started to change, that those are the things that they noticed, and they kind of resented it.
Yeah,
especially because that they were now sources of fear for women.
Fear.
Yep. Yeah. And that they lost the sense of, when women interact, we interact from, men and women. And I learned this when I was doing, because my minor was in communication. And one of my communications instructors took us all the way back to, like, children and how children communicate. And one of the things that I remembered was when boys talk, they sit facing forward. They don't actually sit facing each other. They sit facing forward, and their friendships are built around activity. Little girls, when they talk, they sit facing each other and make eye contact more. And they come from a place of what men perceive as one-upmanship. But for instance, the little girl would say, "Oh, my daddy just got himself new glasses." And the other little girl would say, "Yeah, my daddy got himself new glasses last week." This is not, girls communicate that way to bond through similarity. Even if the little girl number 2 wasn't being honest, right? She said that in order to create equilibrium between her and the other girl to bond, right? Now, when men hear that, they hear, "I'm one-upping you," which isn't the case at all. Women communicate with men to equalize things so that they can bond, right? So, the things that the trans men noticed is that that kind of emotional bonding went away or was reduced as they transitioned and more of their friends became men, or more of their friendships were with men.
But I think it's a different emotional bonding.
Well, I'm just saying from the perspective of trans men that they missed that level of deep emotional bonding that was important to them when they were still interacting with women as friends.
Yeah.
Like there was an emotional void for them. And I don't even know, that's a thing. Like you can say, like you just said, well, men bond differently, but how do you know? You've never bonded the way women do.
I mean, I've looked at people in the eye and talked to them.
It's different. It's just different.
Right. And so who's
you don't
to
have
say
the lived
that
experience of bonding the way women do, because it's just not how you grew up. It's not what you're exposed to. It's not even what you might not even be aware that you're not aware of it.
Right. And I would say the same for women when looking at how men bond.
Yep.
It's not your lived, like,
Yeah. No, men really bond through activity.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But you also, like one of my friends, one of my male friends right now, he's really struggling with suicidal ideation. And one of the things that he and I have been talking a lot lately. And one of the things he shared is that he doesn't feel like he can get close to men. And that women don't want to see that kind of vulnerability in him because he's supposed to be the strong provider. Right. And those two things are, at least in terms of his and my friendship, those two things are absent because we're just friends. Yeah. Right. And so I don't have an expectation of my partners to be strong men anyway, but I want them to be human. But in terms of his and my friendship, those are some of the things that he's sharing, that he's struggling with these mental health issues and can't tell his male friends because he doesn't want to get support from them through activity. He wants to get support to them through emotional sharing. And he can't do that with like a female partner or whatever, because then she questions his ability to be a strong provider.
Right. But I would argue for your friend, and I've run into this in roller derby a lot. I would argue for your friend is that you have to eat it for a while. Not very long, just eat it and do the activity. Because
he has for a few years.
What, that's why the done the activity?
Done the activity. That's why the suicidal ideation has increased for him. Because he's tried to.
Like he's done activities with other men?
All the time. He considers the men that he's friends with to be his family, but he doesn't have the emotional bonding with them that he needs. So he's been hiding some of his struggles, and they've now resulted in occasional suicidal ideation because he feels so alone.
Right, but even in the military, I can't speak to that. I'm not a counselor, but I would fair to say that, has he tried? Because usually whenever you reach a certain level with men doing an activity, even for soldiers, like you can confide in them.
I can't speak to the military aspect, but like I said, he's like revealed to me some deep-seated things that that have been poorly received by male friends and by female partners.
Okay, he might just have shitty male friends. I don't know. It's hard to say. Yeah. All the group, like I'm in strongman and I weightlift. We got when we're lifting, we talk about all sorts of shit. Like we go through a lot of different stuff, and the closer you are with somebody, like you dive into it. You just send it out there, and they might not be able to help. They'd be like, "Man, I don't know, but that sucks." Like that can be enough.
Not for all men.
Well, I can't speak to that. So,
right, yeah. Some men need something more than men. Dude, I'm sorry, that sucks.
Mm-hmm.
So, no.
So,
yeah.
I don't know.
We could get into the age-old conversation about how men and women, bond or don't because of their differing emotional needs. So.
Right.
But yeah. So, but yeah, I coming back to your statement about the rapid onset gender dysphoria. I that's an interesting question. I don't even know.
As like a component of it.
Right,
I don't want to say it's all that, because I know a lot of that.
I'm still iffy about the research on it, because the only research that I've seen on it was interviewing the parents of these kids, and the parents are going to have their own agenda. They just are, right? And so many people have a problem with, queer kids and their kids being queer or gay or lesbian or trans or whatever, that I just don't. I know it sounds shitty, but I don't trust the opinion of the parents of the kids. I want to know what's going on with the kids.
Right.
Not their parents. I don't care about what their parents are saying in interviews. It's not a representation of what's going on with that kid.
Yeah, I agree. And for women or trans men, because that's when you look at who's transitioning young, particularly, it's young women transitioning to men, right?
To trans
men.
That's
right. That's usually that's the higher percentage right now.
Right.
And it would be interesting to see whether internalized misogyny was an underlying cause. Because I know we like to talk about gender as a social construction. Well, what constructs gender? Social interaction. Misogyny is a gender constructing force. Like you look at men.
I suppose that's true. If you're a little boy and you grow up with "don't be a sissy" or "don't be a pussy," which now you're using female genitalia to shame a boy.
Yeah. Misogyny. If we're talking about gender construction, you can't not talk about misogyny as being a force that creates gender. You can't.
Right. Wow.
So if we're talking about someone's their own individual gender construction, misogyny is going to be a part of that.
Yep.
It's not just this because if you want to argue that it's not, then you're talking about, then it's a psychological thing. Then it's innate. We don't have that evidence either way. So.
I have to admit, Norman, in most circumstances, I come into these episodes pretty well prepared and have an opinion one way or the other, or at least a direction I want to go. This one has just been I don't know what's up and what's down. It's these are things that I haven't ever. It literally feels like I've been operating like this when it comes to this topic, and now I'm like, it's gone from here to here because I know there's all kinds of here and all kinds and I don't even know what that is yet,
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it's an interesting topic for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do with it. I don't know where to go from here. I don't know.
No.
I don't know what solutions to offer.
And the thing is I think there are so many perspectives you could come from. You could come from a feminist perspective. You could come from a social construct perspective. You could come from a gender perspective, a sociology perspective, a sexology perspective, a psychology. I don't even know. Blah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know the idea of drag being a way to oppress women or equating it with blackface is going to be hugely unpopular.
Yeah, it already is.
Even with women. Yeah. I'm just more taken aback. What?
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't want to minimize drag. Like I said, I enjoy drag. I enjoy those shows.
Mm-hmm.
But again, as I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, this is, thought adventure. We're going down these rabbit holes. We're looking at these arguments. And those are the arguments, those legal arguments in that document were really interesting.
Yeah.
The arguments made by, Mary Cheney were interesting.
Right.
But, I understand the counter arguments. Is drag an avenue for addressing women's issues? It seems weird, much like you're saying, I get your argument.
I think it could if people wanted to use it for that way. Yeah. And to hear that people are is great. Right? Yeah.
But does drag have negative kind of negative residual effects of misogyny towards women? Expectations of body, cattiness, these toxic feminine behaviors, is perpetuate these things. I realize that women don't own femininity. I get that. But, do drag queens, is femininity what's being characterized by drag queens? Like, is it being explored? Is it being expanded on? Or is it mocking? Like, is it empowerment? I don't know.
I think we need 17 episodes to figure that out, and I don't know that we would.
We would need some guests on too.
Yeah. I think in that sense, like we can debate amongst ourselves all day long, but I think in that sense, I would want to hear from other people who are addressing this already. For me, I'm kind of diving into this like blind. So
yeah. Yeah. I don't know. What do you all think? You all have been watching us for the last hour and a half.
Yeah.
If you see this and you want to post a comment, go ahead. You want to private email us, that's fine. We're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook. It's all under social or Sex Nerd Podcast.
Yeah.
You can find us on all those different places. Send us a message. What do you think?
Yeah. What
do you think of misogyny in the gay community? Is it really there? Why do you think they get a pass? Should they get a pass? Is drag, gender face? We'll call it gender face.
Yeah. Right? Gender face. Yeah. Inquiring minds want to know. Is
it characterization and mockery, or is it empowerment? Like, divorce your own, they're an oppressed minority. You get rid of that. Like, it is men. They are men. Don't forget that. They're men.
They're men.
So, I think
is it the ultimate boys only club?
Yeah. I don't know. And, I want to touch real fast on this one little thing. We talk about the gay culture as being like the Peter Pan culture, right? The boys who don't like to grow up. It's like
we do?
This continual, perpetual childhood. A lot of them do. Yeah, there's a certain.
Are you calling? Wait! Did you just call gay men perpetual children?
No, I said it's perpetual childhood. All of them children.
You just Well, you have the balls. I don't.
There's an interview about queer theory. Jack Haberstam.
Okay.
This queer trans man.
Okay.
We talked about that a lot of the community, there is this kind of embracing of a certain childhood nature or adventure, right? Of the childhood enthusiasm, or even, I won't call it childishness, and in that, can we house, just as you said, young boys are often misogynistic as a way to construct gender. Is that just left over of that childhood perpetuation? I don't know. It's interesting to think about misogyny. I'm going back to I'm going to pat myself on the back. Misogyny is a force of gender construction. I'm going to have to write that down and think about it.
Yeah. That's it. I would be curious to see if anyone else has explored that thought.
Yeah.
Huh.
Fix my camera.
Okay. He gets blurry camera syndrome. Huh. Mind blown today, you guys. Mind blown. I know I'm normally a talker, but I'm just mind blown. So, yeah. At least I have my dog. She's that right there. She's the calm in the room because I'm like, what?
It wouldn't work. Let me in for a minute. It was weird. Anyway, so yeah, that's all I got for this.
Okay, so now you're gonna have to send me papers on this Peter Pan idea because I'm like, what?
Well, I'll have to look it up. But
okay.
It's not that they're children, right? It's that the culture of gay culture has a certain era of childlike narcissism. No, I don't want to call it
No, okay.
narcissism as a negative.
Okay.
Like it's like a
Well,
perpetual
narcissism
boyhoodness.
in children is not a negative. They simply haven't, we grow into like object permanence and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
And the empathy for others and so forth and so on. That those are stages that we go through as we grow up. So that's what I'm asking for. Is this, are you referring to this childlike perspective of, only I and what I want matters? Is that what you're at?
No. It's
No.
more
Okay,
like
okay.
childhood fantasy and dream and excitement.
And that's what the gay community is rooted in?
Well, think about Peter Pan.
Okay.
Peter Pan didn't want to grow up. He wanted to remain a little boy, but he still wanted to have these adventures, and he wanted to explore and all this stuff.
And
that's the idea. That it's not necessarily narcissism, that object permanence framework, but more just like the expectation of like heteronormativity adulthood is kind of cast out the window because you don't need it, or it's
for gay men,
the gay community, particularly like it's particularly in like the 70s, and I would say after the AIDS epidemic, there is a certain like, juvenile excitement to it. I don't know.
Huh. I don't know. I'm lost. So I don't even know. Like I'm trying to shape a picture in my head of what you're like referring to in terms of behavior. Like, are we talking about a sexual innocence, or back to a sexual adventurousness, or a gender expression adventurousness, or being able to move around in society adventurousness, or jumping off a cliff with
all those
what kind
things.
of
all those things. It's just so it's just this umbrella of a lot of that. But with that childhood perspective comes the regulation of gender, right? Through misogyny,
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Mm-hmm. Huh.
Right.
I don't know.
As a negative side of it. But anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, I was saying this while you were rebooting your camera. I was telling the audience, like, mind blown. Luckily, Falcor's here as the calm one, because I'm like, holy crap, what did we just cover today?
Yeah.
Me being mostly speechless.
Luckily, I don't have a career to ruin. So
and I have just been made aware of this through our conversation. So I'm still, I'm asking. I'm sort of like this, looking at it through the eyes of an innocent child, where I'm just like, all I have just like question after question after question. Because I've never thought of this before, ever. It was not on my radar at all.
Yeah,
so, and I want to actually hear from folks in the gay community who are talking and thinking about this stuff, and who are addressing it. I want to hear from them, because I don't even feel like I can speak from the experience of a woman, but I don't feel like I have I shouldn't use my voice to define it for the gay community. I want to hear from the people in the gay community that are actually discussing this stuff, and who are talking about it, and who themselves are wanting to change that particular culture, and why. Like, I think they're the voices that I want to hear.
Yeah. Or do they?
Right. Yeah. Or do they? Right. Or do they? Like, what are the conversations within the gay community about this? That's what I want to know.
Yeah.
That's what I want to know. Yeah. So I'm going to do a lot more diving into this, and I want to search out a lot more voices, about both pro and con, or, different perspectives on it. Like I'm a sponge right now about this whole idea.
Yeah. So, I think it's good. And also I would argue that the people watching too do the same thing. Like, I've tried to present a lot of sides of this argument. I don't want you to think like, Josh Coram is a homophobe transphobe, whatever, anti-queer or drag queen. No,
right.
this is arguments. Again, mental masturbation. How far are we going?
Yeah.
Now, if you want to do thought police crap, that's on you. But that's on like it. Right. You're right. Like, these are ideas to explore. These are ideas to examine. I would love to hear from the communities in which are they addressing it? Is it a thing in their community?
Yeah.
Like, do they care? Do they even give a shit? Is it even on the radar? Are they just tired of being locked in
Well, I think it is on the radar because, the articles that I pulled up, there are people that are discussing it. I would just wonder, like, if someone who's genderqueer, neither you and I are genderqueer. If someone is genderqueer, is that perspective shaping their attitude towards these dynamics? And if so, are they aware of that, right? Because you and I are looking at it through a cisgendered lens.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That adds a whole other component
and a white cisgendered lens, So like, what I want to hear from genderqueer people of color, from genderqueer people, from other gay people, from lesbian, from lesbian people of color. Like, I want to hear all of these because I'm coming at it from this, sure, I have a little bit more on the intersectional sort of framework with being bisexual and the invisibility of bisexuality. But to me, that's separate from the misogyny part, right? Bisexuality and the erasure of bisexuality, to me, doesn't play so much a role, at least from my perspective right now. Maybe there's something I'm missing on that too. I don't know. Yeah. Because I pass as, straight white woman. So I have that level of privilege in society, and there's a lot of stuff I think I haven't had my eyes open to yet as it pertains to this topic. So,
things to look at for sure.
Things to look at. Yeah.
All right, like and subscribe, all that stuff.
All that good
follow
stuff.
us on Twitter. Twitter's not very active, but Instagram for sure. And then
now, as for any future episodes, I know it's been a while. I think we've both had things come up. For me, however, I am moving soon permanently, and so I have to have some time to set up a new studio and so forth. So it might be a minute before we do another show. But just so you guys know, we're not going to stop. And hopefully, once I've settled in and Josh I think you're back in school now for the semester. So we got some things pulling us in different directions, but I think we want to keep doing this just because we have fun doing it and exploring these thoughts. And it's kind of one of the foundations of our friendship. So you all get to come along for that.
Definitely.
Yeah. So we will resume as soon as we can.
Yeah. All right.
All right.
We'll see you next time.
See you guys later. Bye.
Bye.